Hello and welcome back to the Natural Wellness Tips podcast. This is your host, Dr. Jennifer Shaw. I am so excited to be here with you guys today. You know, I love coming to you with incredible guests, but I am just so honored to have Mark Wolynn on the podcast today. He's the director of Family Constellation Institute in San Francisco. He's a leading expert in the field of inherited family trauma, a sought-after lecturer. He teaches at hospitals, clinics, conferences, universities, and teaching centers around the world. He's the author of It Didn't Start With You, How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who You Are and How You End the Cycle. He's the winner of the 2016 Nautilus Book Award in Psychology. It Didn't Start With You has been translated into over 20 languages, and his articles have appeared in Psychology Today, Mind Body Green, mariashiver.com, Elephant Journal, and Psych Central, and his poetry has been published in The New Yorker. I grabbed this book at the beginning of the year as a tool to help me and my partner grow a deeper bond in our relationship. And we were floored at the understanding of ourselves and our lives that we got from this experience and from this book. And on a whim, I reached out to Mark to see if he would come on the podcast, and he said yes. So I am so honored to have you here today, Mark. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, Jennifer, I'm happy to be here.
It's really, I read a lot of books, Mark, and many of them have an impact. Many of them spark conversations in my life. But I can honestly say that your book has absolutely changed how I view each day and how I view my life going forward. The tools in here are absolutely incredible. So I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for writing it and for doing
Oh,
this life's work.
you're so welcome. I really didn't have a choice, right? You get pulled by something that you know you need to bring out into consciousness. You need to bring it to the world, and that's what happened. For 30 years, have been working with inherited family trauma before I knew what it was.
Mm.
It was I needed to turn the lights on.
Literally, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that was part of your journey, was just that healing from physical ailments that you were dealing with and
yeah.
understanding what inherited family trauma was, right? So
Oh,
I would love for you to share with the audience just a little bit about what kind of drove you to this work.
well, what drove me to this work was literally a case I had many years ago. And it also was, as you said, physical issue I had. I lost the eyesight in one of my eyes. I think maybe I start with this case, though, because I had no idea what inherited family trauma was. It's a pretty deep case. Um, if it's too deep, you just cut it out later. But 30 years ago, I was working with this woman who was a cutter, and she was cutting in an extreme way. She was cutting into her body, her arms, her legs, her abdomen so deeply that she would hit a major vessel and almost bleed to death. And uh, her parents would rush her to the hospital. They'd put her in a psych ward for weeks on end. One day I was working with her, and I'll call her Sarah for the sake of this lecture. I said, Sarah, take this pen and show me what happens when you go to cut. And she put I said, pretend this is your knife and show me what happened. She put it on her arm, and all of a sudden she began to glaze over, and her eyes glazed over. She began to dissociate. And I said, right there, right there. What's that feeling? What's that impulse? What's that sensation? What's the emotion? And she looked at me and said, I I deserve to die. I don't deserve to live.
Mm.
And in that minute, I'm looking at a 24-year-old woman whose life had just begun. And I said, what did you do? Did you cause an accident? Did you hurt somebody? Did you break up with somebody who took his life? And she said, nothing like that. So I looked in her childhood. This is what I knew how to do back then. I looked in her childhood and her relationship with her parents, but she had a great relationship with her parents. And she had a great childhood, and she was able to receive the love and nurturance and care from her mother, from her father. And so I thought, okay, it's got to be attachment.
Yeah.
So I said, tell me, and I started looking early at her birth and her delivery and the pregnancy, and it was safe, strong, secure. I was flummoxed. Luckily, I asked this question, which is going to tell your listener right here what inherited trauma is. Luckily, I said, tell me about your grandparents. And boom, she drops the bomb. Her grandmother was an alcoholic. She was driving the car drunk. Grandpa was in the passenger seat. She crashed into a telephone pole. Grandma lived, but Grandpa went through the windshield, got cut, and bled to death
Oh my.
before the ambulance arrived. And in that minute, the whole story was told. Well, I said, oh, it hit me. I go, it's not you who deserves to die. It's not you who doesn't deserve to live. And I had her put, I put chairs in the office and had her close her eyes and tell her grandfather what she was doing. Grandpa, I cut so deeply I almost bleed to death. And I said, add the words like you did, Grandpa. And then Grandma had been having this feeling that I deserve to die. I don't deserve to live. And this is what you would have felt, of course, what she would have felt taking the life of her beloved, or anybody taking a life. So in answer to your question, so this is what sparked me in the direction of, I said, there's something big going on here. Somehow we're connected with the events of the previous generations. And that opened my journey. So really, answer the question, what's inherited family trauma? Let's say one of our parents or grandparents has a significant trauma. They lose their mother or their father when they're young, because her dad was only 12 when he lost his father. And then his mom died of alcoholism poisoning 5 years later. Or let's say, one of our parents or grandparents was sent away or placed in an orphanage, or one of their siblings died tragically. And this event, just sort of destroyed the family. The reaction to the trauma doesn't necessarily stop with the people who experienced it. What we now know through science, biologically, chemically, molecularly, the changes, literally what I see as a therapist, the feelings and sensations, specifically the stress response, can be passed on to children and grandchildren. And now there's lots of biological evidence for this.
It's fascinating. That story, I can see how that story would grab you and say, you have to dig deeper into this. There has to be answers here. Because I would say, even before reading your book, I understood that I could get trauma and patterning from my family, my parents, maybe even a little bit from my grandparents. They had a big part of my life, but I didn't understand it could go back past that even. And that was just, it was so amazing to me. I always had this wonderful connection with my great grandfather, and I didn't know him extremely well. But we always, even as a little kid, one should be scared of him. He was blind, and he just, I was this little kid and I just loved him. And I always had this story that I didn't belong. I didn't belong on my cheerleading squad. I didn't belong in school. I never quite fit in. Even in my family, I never quite fit in. And in reading your story, I uncovered, and I didn't know this until a year ago, my great grandfather was left on a doorstep and adopted.
Yeah.
Yeah. We even went on, and I was talking to my dad about this. I get emotional. I was in a very severe accident in my mid-20s where I was hit by a car. And my great grandfather was in a very severe accident in his mid-20s when he was hit by a car.
Yeah.
I was carrying on these things, and it was so freeing to just say, like, wow, that is like so powerful to have that connection. So one of the things that kind of came up to me as I was reading the book was, okay, yeah, you talk about the Holocaust and you talk about things like this where grandma tragically kills grandpa, and my great grandfather was left on a doorstep. But even when I was reading it, it took me about 3/4 of the way through the book to connect those dots. And I had this story in my head of like, well, I don't know anything. There's nothing I can think of. I'm never going to figure this out. I don't have Holocaust survivors in my family genealogy. What do you say to people that are struggling to come up with that connection that might be causing some of their limitations?
Well, see, that's the way I designed the book. Just what you described. It isn't till the third part of the book where we make these connections. In the first part of the book, I'm helping people look at their trauma language. Remember the Sarah, the story I just told. Here's this 24-year-old woman looking at me saying, I don't deserve to live. And I know that's not her language. This language travels forward. So in the first part of the book, I teach people how to be detectives, really, of their verbal and nonverbal trauma language. Nonverbal trauma language, that's when we repeat certain events in our family history. For example, I have people look at the physical and the emotional symptoms that show up after some unsettling event. For instance, the car crash you have, or this feeling of you don't belong, which is your verbal trauma language. So I teach people how to look for fears, anxieties that strike suddenly when we reach a particular age. Remember, you told me he was in his mid-20s, you were in your mid-20s. It's often the same age that something traumatic happens in our family history. So we can follow our depression when it started, destructive behaviors, self-sabotaging behaviors like Sarah, that arise after situations that are similar to traumas in our family history. Even in our relationship struggles, this nonverbal trauma language appears, who we choose, how we're treated, the types of relationships we have, the repeated ways we deal with money and success. It all forms a breadcrumb trail. So the second part of the book, I help people link it, but they don't really link it till chapter 9, which is when we do the genogram.
Yes.
So that's when people go, oh my God. So what you're describing is exactly what I teach people how to do in the book, and exactly when in the book, when they make that connection.
Yeah.
And then the third part of the book is how we heal, so the positive experiences that we need to change our brain. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a really powerful layout. And it does give you the tools to understand your behaviors. It gives you the tools to understand the wording you've used, the stories you've repeated. It was really, really powerful to walk through that. So I'm glad that the book worked exactly as it should for me, because that was when it kind of unlocked for me. And until that point, I was like, yeah, I'm not going to really find anything. The other thing that you really bring up a lot in the book is early breaks in bonds, specifically with mothers. And this was fascinating to me, because I grew up in a very loving home. But when you ask my mother about me as a child, or even just me, I'm complicated. I always did my own thing. I was a colicky baby. I didn't sleep. It was very stressful. She had a toddler at home. And I don't believe that I had a physical break with my mother as a child, but I had a very emotional break with my mother.
That's right. So breaks in the attachment, breaks in the bond with our mom. This is one of the most common types of trauma I work with, and traumas we don't even know exist because it was early. For example, when we were in mom's womb, she lost the baby before us, died stillborn, a miscarriage. And so she has this feeling, oh my God, this baby, it could die too. It won't survive the pregnancy. I don't feel her kicking. I don't feel her kicking. Something's wrong. And this translates into cortisol. Or if mom and dad are fighting, or if dad's drinking, or if someone's cheating, or if there's an event, mom almost ejects, she starts spotting and almost loses the pregnancy. Or her mother dies, her father dies, her brother dies during the pregnancy, or it's a difficult delivery, or we're put in an incubator, or during our early childhood, mom is stressed, our parents, et cetera, it goes on. She takes a vacation early. Something either breaks the connection physically or emotionally, where mom's attention is pulled this way towards something else. And so we become colicky, independent, efficient, capable as a strategy, because and then maybe we even become mom's helper, believing I need a bond, so I'll take care of mom, rather than trusting I can't trust receiving from her. So yes, I spend a large part of the book talking about early trauma in our early childhood or infancy, or even when we were a fetus, because it's so important. And often we can't find it because it happened so early. The hippocampus hasn't developed connections to the prefrontal cortex until we're about 3 years old. So we don't have memories of any of this stuff when she was stressed. and it broke our emotional connection or physical connection.
And oftentimes I find, and even what you just described in the book, it's like, it doesn't have to be something blaringly obvious, like you were in
No,
the NICU for months
no,
or a week. It could literally be just the emotional state of your mother at that time, and they didn't mean any harm. We're only doing the
absolutely.
best.
Absolutely. It can be so simple
Mhm.
as mom suspects dad is of having an affair, or mom and dad are fighting and almost breaking up. They end up working through it. But during that time, the stress translates into cortisol, or when we're young, it translates, that's in infant in the pregnancy, but when we're young, it translates into her attention going this way. Or they take a simple 1 week vacation and they go to Florida or something, and they leave us with a nanny or a caregiver or our grandparents. Or we go to our grandmothers for the summer when we're 4, but it's too early to be away from our mom for that much. And I'll give you something even more tantalizing in a sense. It doesn't even have to be our break with our mother. What's heritable is her early relationship with her mother, or our dad's early relationship with his mother, or their parents' relationship with their mother. So when you talked about great grandpa being an orphan, being left on steps, that sets up a pattern in the family, which is heritable, of babies who don't belong.
Mm.
And we have this feeling that I don't belong. Whatever family I'm in, I'm not really theirs.
Mm. Wow. Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think it'd be hard pressed to find someone who doesn't have some level of that break, right? Like, and
That's right.
just it's
That's
going
right.
to be in all of us, and it's our choice as to how we want to handle this information and what we want to do from here once we have an understanding of it. And one of the things that you spoke about as well in the book is finding understanding and almost compassion for our family and our parents and their behavior. I had harbored some resentments that came up for me as I read the book, and really kind of understanding that difference helps. So can you share a little bit on what it's like to make that shift, and maybe to begin some of the healing steps around that inherited
Yeah.
trauma?
Absolutely. So what you're talking about when you say that we've got to reach a place of understanding, compassion, many times we're stuck blaming our parents for what they did to us. Now, a lot of times our parents don't parent well, and terrible things happen, it's true. But one of the places I lead the reader is out of this stuckness by saying, let's look at what happened behind your mom. For example, let's go back to Sarah's story. I had Sarah bring her father into the office, and I had Sarah sit on the couch, and I had her father, who had never resolved the trauma of his dad dying terribly, going through the windshield and bleeding to death because he was rageful at his mother for drinking and killing his dad.
Mm.
So I remember saying to him, I said, I'll call him Ed. I'll say, Ed, let's look at what happened behind your mother that made her drink. Tell me what happened when she was little. And he goes, oh, all I know is she was given away to foster care when she was 2 or 3 years old. And I went, of course she drank. And it clicked for him that of course she was looking to, for the dopamine that was missing and the reward motivation circuitry from her mother, giving her away and having no mothering and no connection in this strange foster home.
Mhm.
And of course, she would drink when the feelings of loneliness and terror would be intolerable. And in that moment, he was able to have what you said, understanding and compassion for his mom. And then he could grieve his father. Because remember, every time he's trying to grieve his father, his rage goes toward the mother. And also, he can't grieve the father because of the terrible way the father died. Every time he tries to grieve his father, he thinks of, oh, what a terrible way my dad died. He can't he can't break through. So I had him look behind his mother, and then he could ease up on his hatred of her.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, to heal, I said this in the book, we've got to lose the story we have about our parents. I find that the more we reject our parents, the more we suffer. What's unhealed continues to live on inside of us. Now, healing with them, it means that we're in tune with what they could give
Mhm.
as well as what they couldn't give.
Mhm.
So many of us become fixated on because we believe they've done something to spoil our lives. But now that creates a template inside us, and it forges our later relationships, and it drives our early traumas to keep repeating, because the mother is the template for the partner. So
Mhm.
whatever's unresolved with her, she's the first one to take care of us.
Yeah.
And when something stays broken here, we get a partner, and we look at our partner waiting for the same treatment, for this partner to disappear, this partner to be mean, his partner to shut down, because it hasn't healed early here. Yeah.
Oh, and I did that. I did that in my marriage, my first marriage, and now I'm divorced. And since that divorce, it's interesting, what this kind of leads me into the next question I wanted to ask you is this idea of calming the limbic system, the amygdala, really
Yeah.
feeling safe in our body's responses to life. And
Right.
especially following my divorce, I was in a emotionally abusive marriage, and I turned to alcohol, not
Yeah.
surprising. And a year after I left, I realized that alcohol had been a suppressant. It had been something that just was like, feelings, push them down, drink a glass of wine. More feelings, push
Right.
them down with a glass of wine. So I stopped drinking. I stopped drinking 21 months ago. And I will probably never go back because I've never been so in tune with my body. But in that time frame of being able to actually gain comfort with my emotions, my emotional response, and to uncover those emotions and heal them, I've made so much progress in my life. And now I'm with a partner who I don't even know where I have seen an example of the relationship that we have. It's so empowering and fills me with so much joy, trust, love, and just unconditional love. Really is
Well,
what it
you
comes down
you did the work, Jennifer.
to.
So,
Mm.
you did the work to both pull in a partner that
Mhm.
meets you in the same place,
Yeah.
and to handle your reactivity, and as you said, your emotions, your difficult emotions. And see, it's really the key. For in the beginning, most of us are want to work on our emotional pain, but it's so terrible, or it feels intolerable, or it will never end. If we ever dig deep into there, we'll never come out, we think, or the pain will never end. But it's quite the opposite. We need to practice being with what's uncomfortable, the
Mhm.
uncomfortable sensations in our body, the loneliness we all carry, the intolerable loneliness that lives in our body. We need to be able to be with that until we can reach what's beneath it, which are the sensations, just sensations that we experience as life-giving. Sensations like pulsing, tingling, our heart beating, our lungs filling, expansion, softening, blood flowing, energy, warmth, waves, currents, what lives in our body. And then when we can hold this positive experience of, oh, a rapid heartbeat doesn't just mean that I'm terrified. It could also mean I'm in love. Or it can mean I'm excited. And if I just sit with heartbeat, 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 what happens at this point, we can stay, we can break through, move through what's uncomfortable to be with what's life-giving. And that's how we change our brain, by staying with these sensations for at least a minute, 6 times a day. That can be enough to calm, as you said earlier, the word calm, the brain's stress response.
Mhm. Yep. So well said and so simple, right? It's like it's
Yeah.
just about pausing, breathing, and loving what comes up for you. And that was
What I call in the book the Holy Trinity: breath, sensation, and awareness.
mhm.
They have the other Holy Trinity.
Once we have the awareness and we accept it, we can then move from it. We can grow and we
Yeah.
can change our patterning and change our behavior and change our family story, change our
Yeah.
story, right? Because we are the only ones. I think a lot of times we look to others to change. And I always go back to the sayings, remember how hard it is to change yourself and recognize how impossible it is to change anybody else.
Yeah.
So we're not necessarily like in this book, I didn't learn to change anybody in my family except how I look at everyone in my family, how much I understand them, how much acceptance I provide for them and for myself of them. And then because of that, the healing journey that I can embark on.
Brilliant.
I love it.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I love what you just said. I didn't change anybody else. I just changed me and my reactions. And then that opened all this doorways to compassion, to understanding, to expansion. And that's exactly right.
Mm.
Thank you for that read of my book.
Absolutely. Thank you
It's
for the book.
exactly what I intended to do.
I can't wait for the next one. I truly, I have a few books that always kind of sit in that top pile of like when people ask me what books to read, and this one's been at the top now for a couple months, and I just keep sending it to people and telling people to read it, and I've been having so many amazing conversations. So thank you for your work.
Oh, you're so welcome. Yeah. Yeah.
I could dive deep and have this conversation with you for hours on end. But in respect of the listeners' time, in respect of your time, I'm going to wrap up the podcast and ask you some of my favorite questions that I ask at the end of every podcast. Are you ready?
Sure, shoot.
Okay. What is your number one health and wellness tip that you recommend for the listeners if they could do one thing in life?
Yeah. Just like we've been talking about, do your inner work. Don't push away what's uncomfortable. Explore it. Learn what your triggers are and how you can respond calmly to something rather than go into reactivity. Just keep looking at your triggers and read the book and see what those triggers are connected to. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And then once you can recognize those triggers, you can communicate them with people.
Yeah.
So one of the things that helps me and my partner is when something triggers me, even if it makes 0 sense, I explain to him why it triggered me and we talk about it and we
Perfect.
recognize where it came from. And that the book did help us do that at a deeper level, which is
Oh
amazing.
yeah. Well, the book was a best, it didn't start out a bestseller. It was,
Yeah,
what's interesting now is it sells more now, 4 years later, and it's a bestseller. And it just kept growing. It was a word of mouth book.
it is.
And so
It
it's,
is.
thank you for being one of those mouths
Oh yeah.
that tells people about it. Thank you about that.
I won't stop. Don't worry. Okay. So a lot of times people think because we are in this health and wellness field that we're perfect. We have everything together and we don't struggle in any areas. Is there any area of your health and wellness that you struggle to stay consistent in? You struggle to keep up?
Yeah. um, like a million things, but I would say the biggest right now is aerobic exercise.
Mm.
Um, I love to walk, and I know that's my exercise. I just take walks, but I know I should break a sweat more. So my doctor said, and but I like walking more than running. So I guess I struggle with aerobic exercise.
Yeah, that could be it. I mean, walking is so refreshing and it makes you feel so good. It does get the heart going, but I do love a good sweat. So, but I understand too. It kind of, I've been in seasons of my life where it's like just not something that I'm pulled towards. So it's hard sometimes to motivate ourselves, right? Okay, so next question is, what are you most excited about in life right now?
Oh, okay. So I'm on sabbatical working on my next book. And I'm excited about my next book as well. But I would say what really pulls me is just playing more music. So the pandemic, among being this horrific event, on the positive, has allowed me to become a pretty good lead guitar player because, I spend a lot of time playing guitar. So music just turns me on.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yes. I tried guitar for like 2 years as a teenager, and it was one of those like I put in the effort and I just never quite got mastery of it. And I was like, this just might not be for me, but it was fun.
Yeah.
I love that you're taking the time for that expression. That's beautiful. The last thing really is oh no, I have one selfish question. What
Okay.
is your other than your book, because I know this is one of my top favorite books. What is your favorite book?
Well, yeah, Book of Poems by Rilke. For the listener, Rilke, Rilke, a German poet. Eh, I find something new each time I read one of his poems. Rilke, Rumi, of course, Hafiz, but Rilke would be probably my favorite poet.
I probably have about 6 books of poems around my house, and I grab them just sporadically and open to any page. And I'm like,
Yeah.
that's what I needed to hear, universe. Thank you. So I'm going
Perfect.
to grab that for sure. Thank you for the recommendation. And lastly is, where can everyone find you? Where is the best place to purchase your book? I know people
Oh,
are going to be fascinated by this conversation.
okay. The book is at all your best favorite booksellers, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever. Um, and people can find us, me online. So it's www.markwolynn, WOLYNN.com. And if you're a clinician, I have a great training that I just completed to learn how to do my work. Um, and they can buy the streamable training that just finished. Really, it's quite good.
Very cool. I'm going to reach out to some colleagues about that and say, hey, you got to check this out. That's amazing. Well, thank you. I
Well,
honestly can't thank you enough for your work, for this conversation, for taking time out of your sabbatical to do this interview with me. Uh,
mm,
is truly means the world to me to have this deep conversation and to just dive deeper in the healing and be a vessel to help share your message with more people. So thank you.
oh, thank you, Jennifer. It was just wonderful to talk with you.
Amazing. Well, hopefully after the second book, we'll get to have another conversation on here. I
Yeah.
can't wait for it to come out. But for those of you guys listening, thank you guys for tuning in through this conversation. Make sure you check out Mark's book and message me when you read it. I can't wait to hear your ahas. If you haven't headed over to Instagram, you can find Mark on Instagram as well. You can find me on Instagram, Natural Wellness Tips. Say hello, tag us in the book so we know you're reading it. And we'll catch you guys next time on the podcast. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Namaste.